All right. Welcome. We're going to wait and let the people who are going to attend go ahead and log in, and then we'll be getting started shortly.
Okay.
Everyone, welcome. We're just going to wait maybe a few more minutes and let some more people get in. Thank you for attending, and we'll be starting shortly. All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to the Transportation Equity Forum Series 3. Today, we're going to be talking about unmet needs in transportation services for senior and disabled populations, along with occupational therapy's role in senior safe mobility. This series has been brought to you by the Ohio Aging and Disability Transportation Coalition, Services for Independent Living, Ohio Development Disability Council, Ohio Mid-Eastern Governments Association, and the American Occupational Therapy Association. Just some housekeeping rules. Everyone will be muted. If you have questions, please share them in the chat box, and we will attempt to answer them at the end of both presentations. A recording of this workshop will be available on our website at www.seal-ohio.org. Today's presentations are available for download as well as attachments over on the control panel. There will be a satisfaction survey emailed to you after this presentation. Please fill it out. This is how we get our feedback on how we're doing or where we can improve. Today, we have two great speakers. We have Deborah Hill, who is the transit planner at the Ohio Mid-Eastern Government Association, and we have Elin Schold Davis, who is the practice associate and manager of community access over at the American Occupational Therapy Association. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Deb. Deb, how are you today?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here and excited. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. So just let me know when you want to advance to each slide.
Okay, as India just said, I am the transit planner for the Omega region, and I'll talk a little bit more about that region as we get into the presentation. So next slide, please. Just as a discussion guide, I'm hoping to help define some of the issues, looking at some proposed solutions, and then showing you the goals that we're setting to try to help meet some of these unmet needs. Next slide, please. So the first thing you have to do is figure out what is the issue and what are the problems. So that's defining and discovering the unmet needs. You have to look at what is transportation equity. No one asks the people who actually know the answers. that we're looking for. So you have to spend some time uncovering and understanding the issues, and then work on getting transportation information and options out to the people who need it, finding a better way to communicate, and lastly, oh, I don't ride public transit, overcoming that issue. So next slide, please. What's in a word? On the top of this slide, you will see equality. And as a nation, equality is such a touchstone word for all of us. But this is not what we're after in transportation. So on the top slide, you see equality. There is an equal bike for every person, the child, the woman, the man, and the disabled person. And that is equal access, equal bikes and equal access. But that is not what we're looking for. We need to be working for equity, which is on the bottom line, where everyone has the opportunity to bicycle in a way that is suited to their needs and their circumstances. Next slide, please. So when it comes to discovering and understanding the issues, we tend to be like that gentleman. We peek through our fingers through the lens of our own personal realities and say, oh, this is probably a barrier. Oh, this is probably a problem. And then through that same lens, we try to solve the solution. And then we say, great, thumbs up, we've done it. But no one is asking the people. That's not true. Often the people that are experiencing the issues are not being asked or asked enough so that their input is included. Next slide, please. So here, unmet needs. So here's a woman in a city. They have public transit. She's seen the sign. She has recently developed some eyesight problems, but she's seen the public bus stop sign. And so this is her first time out to try to go get groceries. She has that pathway to walk down. At the end of that pathway, she turns right for about a block. There's no sidewalk for that block, so she has to walk on the side of the road. But then there is a sign, not a shelter, but a sign where a public transit bus will come pick her up. So you could look at that through a lens and say, that's equal. She has equal access. The bus comes. She has a walkway to get there. But what if I told you that that woman's eyesight has deteriorated significantly just in the last week or two? And that cane that she's kind of dragging instead of using, that's new to her. But she's been kind of feeling wobbly and uncertain. And she has family, but her daughter just got a new job and moved out of state. So they're not close anymore. And with her eyesight going worse, she's been asking people from church to try to take her to the grocery store, but she's starting to feel like she's being a burden to those same people all the time. So she's decided she's just going to have to go try this on her own. So she's striking out for the first time. And as she's walking down, she's thinking to herself, how hard it's going to be to carry 2 bags of groceries back down that long path. And what if a car comes when she's on the street? Can she get out of the way, or is she going to be safe? And she's also thinking, okay, today's fine, but this is the only coat I have. What am I going to do when there's 6 inches of snow on the ground? Did they even clear this path for me? And she's worried and wondering about all these things. And what you can't see is that that sidewalk is just not quite level. So in 15 or 20 feet, there's a little, like say, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch difference in the level between the cement slabs. And she's thinking about all these other things and kind of dragging the cane, and her eyesight is getting worse. And she misses that step and trips and falls. So what if that was your mother? What if that was your sister? What if that is that sweet old lady that sits 3 rows back on the right in church every Sunday? This is the difference between equity and equality. We need to have transportation solutions that fit individualized needs. And the worst part of this scenario is she is in an area where there is demand response service. So she could be picked up at her doorstep, but she doesn't know about that. Next slide, please. This shows one of the strongest barriers to get proper transportation, and that is access to general information. Try as we might, and people in transit and transportation do try really hard to get the information out to people. There is still a significant number of people in the populations, general populations, as well as the specific ones we're talking about. They don't know who to call. They don't know what information they can look up. They don't know where to look it up. They don't know if they have options. They don't understand what their options are. This is a barrier that is the first one to overcome, and one that has some easy steps. Next slide, please. Another barrier is, what are my options? So great, you've figured out to call, you booked a trip, but now you don't know how to get to the transportation. So there are first mile, last mile issues. Maybe the curb doesn't have a curb cut, so how are you going to get your wheelchair up or down from the sidewalk? Maybe the sidewalk is in disrepair or there isn't one. Now you're traveling on the street and in unsafe conditions just to try to get to your transportation. And do you even have other options, or is there just one way to go? Do you have other ways that maybe your transportation could be paid for? People just don't know, and this becomes a great barrier as well. Next slide, please. Another barrier, are we even on the same page? So transportation language can sometimes sound confusing to seniors or people with disabilities, really to everyone. So you might call in to a transportation company and say, I'd like to go to Walmart on Thursday. And they might say, great, did you want demand response or did you want fixed route? Okay, you have no idea what they're talking about. So you just say, fixed route. So they ask you another series of questions. You start to feel less and less comfortable because you don't understand what they're asking you or why they're asking for some of the information. And some of it is personal, to check to see what funding sources are available for a rider. But to someone who's new, that can feel a little invasive. The options that they give you might be confusing. And I've heard some people say, I just started saying yes because I didn't understand. So sometimes you end up getting transportation, but it's not the transportation you needed because there is this difference in language. Next slide, please. And the last one, well, not the last, but the other one I want to talk about is old and outdated perceptions of public transit. So as they said, we really have come a long way, baby, as far as public transportation goes. Next slide, please. So this is public transit today. It's clean, affordable. It is available to everyone. It is not just for one certain group of people or another certain group of people. This is in the Omega region in Columbiana County. It's a rural county on the eastern border of Ohio. This is their shuttle stop sign. This was a new program just instituted about 1.5 years ago. You can see the shuttle bus has a fold down ramp in the front, and it goes right over whatever sidewalk or curb there might be. So there's no barrier to get on or off the bus. And then this is a gentleman who's finished his shopping at Walmart and is now tied down. All public transit drivers are all very, very well trained in safety issues and how to tie down wheelchairs and how to work with other conditions of disability and seniors. Next slide, please. Public transit also can take you many more places than you might have guessed. We have public transit that picks up seniors and takes them to daycare programs. We have programs that will take them on outings. We have people that go to the YMCA's for senior exercise programs. So the maybe old thinking of public transit only going 1 or 2 places is really outdated. There's a myriad of places you can get to, restaurants, and not just Walmart or a grocery store. Next slide, please. Public transit also has become much, much more accessible. Most fleets are at least 80% accessible. Most are higher than that. So you saw a couple slides ago an example of a ramp that folds out in the front of a bus. Here you can see on your right an example of a lift at the back of a bus that can help with mobility options. And also on your left, a modified ramp into a modified minivan. So lots of different ways of transporting, and almost all of them accessible. Next slide, please. So what are some possible solutions to finding and meeting these unmet needs for the disabled and senior populations? Well, the first thing to do is to start and keep lines of communication open. Also to put in place structures, so there can be structures that add a little bit of help when somebody needs that. We have structures put in place to help create transportation options and solutions. We have structures in place to help encourage input in the decision-making process by these populations. We need to create better and easier access to information and never lose sight of the client experience. We can't be peeking through our fingers. We need to ask people what they need and how they need it, and then provide services that work, which is part of developing and implementing mobility as a service. Some ways that you can do those things: nothing will ever beat face-to-face. A conversation, a willingness to hear what situations and barriers people face, to act on that information, and then to go back and ask again. Did this solve the problem? Is this easier for you? Is there something else that you need? There are mobility solution centers being created where you can call in and you get a solution to your transportation issue, not just a list of here's 3 numbers that you can try calling. Those centers also provide access to centralized comprehensive information, so that in one phone call you can ask questions not just about your city, but maybe you're going 2 counties over for a doctor visit or something like that. All the information is located in one centralized mobility solutions center. We need to be better at developing easy to access guides for transportation that are available to the public and also to service agencies, and available in many different forms: paper, traditional paper format, but also websites and apps, phones and online. And then we also need to use the technology that has been developed. It is sometimes a scary barrier on the receiving end, but if we set it up correctly, we actually can make it work to help the client and assist them without it being a scary experience on their end. Could I have the next slide, please? First and foremost, in any relationship, the most critical thing is communication and dialogue. If you really want to know what the barriers are, go find someone who's experiencing them and ask them. I have never found someone say, I don't want to talk about this with you. I don't want to help make this better. The wealth of information is there, and we need to just ask. When you think you've solved the problem, you need to go back and ask again. We need to not think of these as had an issue, solved it, one and done, and now move on. No, it needs to be a constant feedback loop that we create, and you're going to have to build in flexibility in systems so that it can adapt to that feedback. Next slide, please. So this is the Omega region. We are a regional transportation planning organization, 10 counties on the eastern Appalachian counties of Ohio. We are one of 2 pilot regions in the state of Ohio that are looking at regional coordinated transportation. Our counties are rural. There is another region that's almost exactly on the opposite side of the state that's more urban. So the state of Ohio is looking at regionalizing transportation issues from all different points of view. The pilot is funded by FTA and the Ohio DOT. The Omega region is the first region in Ohio to develop and approve a regional coordinated transportation plan. Next slide, please. Another asset we have in the state of Ohio is mobility management. This is one of those structures put in place for people that maybe need a little extra help and have a little extra information needed. Out of 88 counties in Ohio, 57 are represented by mobility managers. Mobility managers focus on developing customer-centered solutions to transportation issues. So they are actively engage the senior communities, the disabled populations, low-income populations, and the general population to help transportation systems in their counties better adapt to the needs of the peoples that use those transportation systems. And they are constantly focused on getting out information and finding the right fit solution. Mobility managers in the state of Ohio are funded at 80/20 through ODOT. Next slide, please. The FAST Act of 2015. FTA 5310 funding requires that a county have a coordinated transportation plan. They also require that there be input from seniors and disabled persons, and that input is gathered in a couple different ways. People from those populations are invited to participate on advisory committees and be in focus groups. If they can't participate in person, advocates are invited to participate so that we make sure that the voices of these underserved communities are heard. Surveys are sent out. People go out to events that are held for seniors and disabled persons to try to get more information and input. And as I said, so these are county coordinated transportation plans. The Omega region also has a regional transportation plan. Next slide, please. So in the Omega region, this is some of the things we're doing. We have tried to put in place structures from the beginning to the end to guarantee that we have input and feedback from the disabled and senior populations. So we have a regional coordinated plan, which combines the coordinated plans from each of the counties and sets regional goals and helps fund regional projects. Specific efforts are made to target the seniors and the disabled persons for their input. I mentioned going to maybe area agency on aging is having a senior day function. We'll send people there to try to get surveys filled out and to talk to people one-on-one and get input. Public meetings are held in each county, and then the survey data in multiple formats. In the Omega region, we also have a steering committee. On that committee, at least one member is there specifically to bring up and address needs and concerns of seniors. One person is there specifically to bring up and address needs and concerns of disabled persons. All public transit directors are on that steering committee. So it's not just a conversation of people that aren't the decision makers. So the transit directors that are making the day-to-day decisions on their transit systems, how they'll run, when they'll run, they are on that steering committee. They hear directly from the advocates and other people on the steering committee. And the steering committee has a direct say in transportation project funding. Everyone has an equal vote, and in that way we level the playing field so that everyone's voice gets heard, and funding for projects on a countywide or a regional basis have to consider the impacts and the best practices to meet the unmet needs of underserved populations. Next slide, please. In the Omega region, we're piloting a regional call center. I mentioned the Mobility Solutions Center. That's what we are calling ours. This will be one phone number where people can call in to get access to regional and local transportation options all in one place. They can call and get a solution in one phone call. They can call and say, here's where I need to go. Here's when I need to be there. I don't know who to call. The Solutions Center representative will work out all of their trip options, call them back and let them know their options, discuss them until the client decides what is best for them, and then help them make the trip. These also include out of region and out of county trips and coordinated trips, which means you might have to use more than one transportation provider. Next slide, please. We're also going to have a regional transportation resource guide. It will be available online in 2021. This could be accessed by the public or by service agencies. It will have all transportation resources listed by county. It is updated by the mobility managers at least yearly. And through the COVID, we were updating transportation on a weekly basis so that people could know, I need food, who can bring it to me, where can I go to get it, is this service still running? So it can be updated more often as situation demands. And it is a place where you can find centralized information for the entire region, but by county. So trying to break down that barrier of, I don't know who to call, I don't know where to go to look for information, this resource guide, it will help to alleviate that barrier. Next slide, please. We're also piloting an information and trip booking app coming in 2021. We are piloting it, but it will become a statewide platform in the future. You can access it by phone or computer, and it provides all of your options for transportation. So you could get on the app, you can say, I am 82, I need a wheelchair, this is where I'm starting from and this is where I'm going, and it will return back to you all of your options. So that might have been a bad example because I said I needed a wheelchair. Let's say you didn't put that in. It might say you can walk to your destination. It will take you approximately 27 minutes. You could bike to your destination. It will take you approximately 17 minutes. You could take public transit, and here's where you would get the public transit. It will take you 40 minutes, and it will list out all of the options that you have. It will also have a link right in the app to mobility managers for your county. So if you don't understand, there's too many options, or you're not quite sure what one thing means versus another, you'll be able to have a direct link to mobility management in your county and to the Mobility Solutions Center. We're working on digital payment functions. They're not coordinated yet, but that's where we're headed. Next slide, please. We also have a software access project that our region's working on that will link scheduling software regionally through a shared portal. So that means all the systems will be able to look through one portal at all of the information regionally, which will increase access and availability of coordinated trips. We're also hoping to coordinate that with other systems that already build client profiles, like hospitals and job and family services, so that we won't have to ask so many questions when someone needs to call in for a ride. That data will already be populated, and we'll already know if they need a wheelchair, if they need an assistant to go with them, or whatever information they won't have to keep telling us over and over and over. It'll be in the system, and we'll be able to coordinate and already know that when people call in. Next slide, please. We use technology to maximum benefit in the region. All of the public transit systems in the Omega region and most of the transportation providers use software that has call features. That means that when someone calls in and makes a trip, maybe they do that 2 weeks ahead. And maybe you're a senior with Sundowner, or your life is just busy. All our lives are. The system will call or text either the rider or their caregiver at their discretion and let them know the afternoon before the trip. So they will call and remind you, hey, you scheduled a trip and the bus is going to pick you up at 3:47 tomorrow. There's also call and text features that will call 15 minutes ahead of the pickup time, which is especially helpful in Ohio winters. So you'll have a 15-minute sort of advance notice. You'll have time to get your coat, grab your purse, get your water, get your medicine, go down and be at the door when the vehicle gets there to pick you up. And again, these texts can be sent either directly to the client or to their caregiver. Next slide, please. So is this enough? Because we're working very, very hard. We have a lot of pilots, a lot of irons in the fire. Is this enough? No, it's not enough. We do know that, but we are trying to head in the right direction and using those feedback loops to make all of the tools that we have right now at our disposal work the best that we can, with an eye always to improve. Next slide, please. Some of the ways that we are working towards transportation equity is, number one, ask and keep asking. Create more ways for input. Nothing is more effective than this. And with COVID, it's been much more difficult. Clearly, the face-to-face meetings are not taking place. So we're having to rely on some survey data, maybe phone calls, but keep asking. There's nothing that will give more benefit than that. Expand access to information and transportation options. Keep striving for equity, not equality. build in the support systems like the solution centers, the resource guide, the mobility management program. I could not speak highly enough about that. Increase awareness and sensitivity training for all levels in the transportation service industry. We don't want to be the person peeking out between their fingers, thinking that we understand the landscape we're seeing. And then move towards mobility as a service. These are all practices designed to be a right fit to individual needs, and that's where transportation needs to head. Next slide, please. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity. Oh, I think I even finished on time. How about that? Deborah Hill, that's my name. That's how you can reach me. Olivia Hook is the mobility coordinator. So if anyone else had questions about mobility management, how do you get it set up? How is it funded? Any of the specific details, you can feel free to reach out to Olivia and or me, and I'll get you where you need to go. So thank you very, very much for all your attention, and thank you for the opportunity to talk on this topic. I really appreciate it.
Wow, Deb, that was awesome. Thank you so much. A lot of great information. I think a lot that people can actually take back, with them. And we're going to get to questions and answers towards the end, like I said. And up next, we are going to move forward with Elin. Elin, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So we're going to go ahead and start on yours. One moment. Let's see. Okay. All right, Elin, you have the floor.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in your series on transportation equity. If you want to move to the next slide. My name's Elin Schold Davis, and as India introduced me, I work for the American Occupational Therapy Association, and I work on managing projects toward community access and driver initiatives. Next slide. My focus today is going to be really looking at occupational therapy's role and the role of driving rehabilitation, and more specifically, the idea of driving evaluations. Because when we talked earlier, India wanted to have us discuss to work on a better understanding in our community about these different services. And Deb Hill's presentation was so informative, and there's so many things out there for transportation options. Yet a lot of times our focus in some of the conversations, particularly when we look at aging and seniors, is about driving being the center, and then driving testing as this main goal. And I'm hoping to put some more perspective to those pieces. Certainly the access to transportation options and using them earlier, getting familiar and competent at using transportation alternatives gives everybody more choices. Because on this slide, driving safety depends on our skills and abilities that may change over time realistically, or be altered by medically related changes against our will. Something happens, an illness, a stroke, and all of a sudden things change, and it changes how we have known to go about our transportation and our mobility. Concerns about driving should be met by a thorough exploration of causes and solutions, and understand and distinguish a spectrum of different services in your community that all might come under a sort of a generalized heading of evaluation or driving evaluation. So my hope today is to put some awareness distinguishing some of these services and what they offer. Next slide. Just to go into some of the data, motor vehicle injuries are the leading cause of injury-related deaths among 60 to 74-year-old adults, second amongst those aged 75 to 84. The point is that it is important that we look at safety for seniors, and the number of older drivers is increasing from 44.7 million older adults in 2013, with 82% licensed. Currently, 17% of all licensed drivers are over 65. And by 2050, there'll be twice as many, 89 million. And the point of this slide is this is an opportunity. We need to work on helping people be able to drive if they want to. Our focus is not on figuring out how to take away driving, but instead support people in their goals of driving who want to, and support people in their availability of alternatives, as Deb Hill so well described, for people who would like an alternative to driving their own car. Next slide. Does this data mean older drivers are dangerous? It does not mean that. And that's one of the unfortunate public messaging pieces that I think interferes with seniors and people that have any kind of disabling condition feeling safe accessing the resources that might assist them in figuring out how to be drivers or how to be more driver independent when they feel like they're being categorized as dangerous or somebody that should be stopped. Next slide. Identification of risk identifies a population to serve. It identifies a need and a gap. Identifying risk for driving, wondering if somebody's at risk as a driver, is not a direct line to taking away their keys. And if there's one message I hope that I will convey during this presentation, is that risk identifies a need for service. Next slide. And identification doesn't mean taking away. We need to build trust in accessing the services that we have. Next slide. And this is an interesting projection. It's projected that we will outlive our driving capacity to safely operate a vehicle by 7 to 10 years. We're living longer. People are living longer and healthier. However, the fundamental underlying skills and abilities to operate a vehicle likely will not be at the level where you can operate a vehicle safely for the last 7 to 10 years. For people with the aspiring to age in place, this means you'll be in your home 7 to 10 years without being a driver. So again, thinking about how all of these pieces fit together is really important when we look at a series of changes that will happen to protect our mobility as we age. Next slide. And it also requires that decisions be made. Are you ready? Some talk about that people who've been licensed since the 1920s and 30s and 40s often thought that that license that they got was a right to drive for as long as they wanted to. What we've been working on over the last few years is building an awareness that there's a fundamental skill set, an underlying skill set to be able to safely operate a vehicle. And we all have to be mindful of this bar of being able to have the vision, the physical ability, and the cognitive ability to be able to operate our vehicle safely. And we all need to know that there are multiple other ways we can get around if driving our own car is not the safest and wisest way for us to get around. This really applies to all of us as we think of our transitions through our life stages and the mobility that we want in our lives. Next slide. So I'm going to really look at this in 3 themes for this presentation. I'm going to look at prevention through education. I'm going to highlight a couple of programs in these different categories to just focus on some of the resources that are out there in our communities and hopefully inspire that there are many more. And these are areas that we need to grow and build access in our communities. We have prevention through education programs. We can extend driving through risk assessment, evaluation, and intervention. And we are working on building the public messaging that planning for transportation transition is something we want to plan for as we plan for housing and we plan for finances. Our transportation needs and abilities are likely going to change throughout the lifespan. And we need to think ahead and empower ourselves by being aware of what these options are and learning to access them. I have the red stop sign there that says stopping. In the middle is a person who wants to drive. Too often, I think the messaging is you go from wanting to drive to somebody stopping you from driving, and there is no line that goes directly there. If people want to drive, we need to ensure that they have access to the evaluation services that can either extend their driving or counsel them out of driving. And also we want to look on planning and empowering transition, and many people make the decision to stop all on their own, based on their own understanding of their abilities, and they make wise choices. If I were to be redoing this slide after hearing Deb Hill, I might put another icon up where the 3 themes is that talks about transportation alternatives, because I think it's really important that people access transportation options. They use various forms of transportation long before they need to depend on it. So they become transportation wise, and the ability to fluctuate between maybe driving and using transportation options is easy and fluid, and it helps people transition and maintain their mobility despite, or in not just, no matter what their medical or capacities are, medical abilities or capacities are at a given point in time. Next slide. So first, I just want to highlight a couple of prevention through next slide, through education programs. One of them is building self-awareness through education, like the driver safety courses offered through AAA, AARP, the safety councils. There's a number of community-based education programs that increase seniors' awareness of changes associated with aging, of how they might want to think about their transportation options. Also, we want to build skills through practice or lessons. Sometimes people will go to a driving school and practice navigating those roundabouts or these new configurations on the roads. Building skills, being a lifelong learner, is a pathway to safety. And building awareness of vehicles, vehicle fit, and technology. So next slide. So I'll highlight just a couple of programs that fit. CarFit is a program that is a collaboration between AAA, AARP, and AOTA. And India, if you're able to show that quick video, this is just a video that highlights what CarFit is all about. More interesting than hearing me talk about it.
Unfortunately, the volume wouldn't work, so you can just continue.
Okay. CarFit is a public education program. If anybody's interested in bringing this public education to your area, what AAA, AARP, and AOTA have done is put together the materials and offer training, and it's something that can be offered in our community. What we know is that the safety features in our vehicles are designed to best protect you when you are sitting in the best position you can, when you have enough gap between your steering wheel and your chest so that your airbag can deploy, so your seatbelt is always on properly. And CarFit goes through some of those 12 points, and also occupational therapists are at CarFit to explore some low-tech or gadget-type solutions to solve some problems that people might be encountering when getting in and out of their car, or getting adjusted, or being comfortable in their car, maybe accommodating a surgical scar or a pacemaker, and they're wondering about their seatbelt. And we can talk about solutions to that. Next slide. And we are working very hard right now on a virtual platform, and we'll be launching that in November, so stay tuned. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about driving evaluation and the idea of risk assessments and evaluation. Next slide. Oftentimes the discussions about driving focus on evaluation. And I want to emphasize that there are several services that could be included under the heading of driving evaluation or driving education programs. Driving schools offer tests of driving skills and lessons to improve those skills. Driver licensing offices at the state offer a standardized road test at the licensing agency. However, the outcome of that is a pass-fail. That's not intended for learning. That's intended to be evaluating abilities at a fixed point in time. The driving rehabilitation specialist, the trained driving rehabilitation specialist, offers a comprehensive driving evaluation that includes clinical assessments, an individualized plan, And what the difference is, it explores any options for compensating for the problems that may have been observed or may have been identified through the testing, and figure out if there are any safe ways to continue driving. And if there's a possibility, they will explore that. Next slide. So I want to focus a bit on screening, because screening is something I think we see a lot of in our communities, and there are some distinctions to understand. Screening is intended to build awareness of change. It is not intended to be a place to make a decision. There are self-screening tools offered in many of the safety courses, checklists, have you noticed? And all of these are to increase our awareness of change. And when we're aware of a change, we can do something. We are best equipped to be able to do something about it. Screening by loved ones concerned with observed driving performance. I'm going to show you a tool that you can use for that. It's free and available online. And I'm also going to show you a tool that's been published by the American Geriatric Society, the CADRS, which includes a screening tool for healthcare providers. Next slide. The Fitness to Drive screen is simply, it's available online. This is something that family members actually would complete if you're worried about your loved ones driving. So you would go online and fill out a form and answer a series of questions that would indicate areas that you have observed and how you felt your loved one or was performing. And then when you get done, it prints out a score, and it prints out a data sheet that you can print in color if you can, and bring it to your doctor or health professional to give you some data on which to start a conversation about where you may be worried. Mind you, this might identify areas that we can work at. It might identify that really, I wonder if their glasses need to be checked. Gosh, I wonder what problems could be fixed. But this is a screening measure that's available and free for people to use. Next slide. Another screening measure that has been published for healthcare providers to give us a consistent kind of a toolkit for the screening step. The first step of building awareness of driving changes is in the clinician's guide for assessing and counseling older drivers. Initially, it came out for physicians, and it's been broadened to clinicians. So the tools are targeted for healthcare providers, people trained that are in programs that could provide some screening and that could then assist in people accessing the next steps along the evaluation continuum. Next slide. I thought I would provide just a few examples of what this might look like. You don't need to read all the detail in this. If you look to the left, why I really put this in here is to show that in any logical progression, looking at the medical model, we start with screening. Screening tells us whether we should look further. If we look further and we do an evaluation, then what do we do with those results? Do we work on restoring a problem? Do we work on moving to transportation options? What are the outcomes of our evaluation? And this tool is trying to help build a common language amongst health providers for these series of steps. Next slide. Just to make sure people are aware of what all is looked at when we are wondering about driving, these are really the common, universally accepted underlying pieces that we should be looking at, whether we're at a level of screening or whether the occupational therapy driving rehab specialist is looking more deeply. We would begin in these general areas of assessment. First, of course, you get a history from people, and importantly for the OT, we make sure we understand if driving is really important for someone. For some people, it's not that important, and boy, accessing all these transportation options is just a much better and easier way to go. For other people, driving is the most important thing for them. They want to preserve driving if there's any possibility, and so we need to go down the road that they lead us. Next slide. And this is just an example of what some of the tests look like. Certainly, we always look at vision. Vision is really important, and I can't emphasize how important it is for people to make sure they have current glasses and keep them clean. Next slide. We look at motor abilities, and there's some screening tools that are included in this assessment, but you're looking at range of motion, but we're also looking at pain, stiffness from arthritis. All of these things can interfere with our ability to operate a vehicle safely. Next slide. And we look at cognition. Cognition is probably, as some would say, the elephant in the room. Really, we're looking at the capacity to, most of the education programs that I talked about earlier are based on the ability for a person to be self-aware. If you learn how something has changed, can you do something about it? And unfortunately, that relies on healthy cognition. And for some people, the disease process they might be encountering, such as a dementia, interferes with the capacity to be aware, the capacity to really understand what has changed, and the capacity to make the changes. So understanding cognition is really an important component. So you will see even in this screening test that there's a number of different assessments included. Next slide. And even more, because cognition is really important, and we look at a number of areas. Next slide. So in the clinician's guide, all the forms for these tools for screening are included with instructions of how to administer and score them. So this is a way to help us understand some of the basic areas that are included as we are thinking about driving competence. Next slide. Decisions are not to be made on the results from screening. I cannot overemphasize that. Many programs are putting out self-screenings, which is great. The intention is to build awareness. The intention is that awareness will have one think, gosh, I need to maybe get this looked at more thoroughly. We would never guess on whether a lump was cancerous or not. We would then take that lump we noticed to the next level and have it looked at by the right professional. So the hierarchy is screening, which can be done at a more general level with a broader net, just looking for change. Evaluation is more specific, and occupational therapy practitioners may do that in the OT clinic. And specialist evaluations are looking specifically at managing a vehicle on the road. Next slide. So the comprehensive driving evaluation, which is different from the screening we talked about, takes clinical tools that may look very similar to the ones I just showed you, but they will be looked at with greater depth. They have a level of training to individualize the tools that are used for an individual patient and to interpret those results. And they also take the person in the vehicle, so they can look at vehicle entry and exit, on-road performance, from basic to complex road demands, and all clinical components are really evaluated then in this functional context of looking how a person is doing on the road. And in a driving evaluation, they are looking at the components of the driver, their vehicle, and any wheelchair or mobility device they may need to use, and loading, stowing, all the different factors that are involved in the complete package for a person being mobile. Next slide. So what we've been working on for the past few years is working on building awareness of our occupational therapy programs to be doing a more consistent job at doing their part with screening and doing their part with the evaluation step to identify risk and identify those that should or may benefit from a comprehensive driving evaluation at the right time. So the OT Drive model has a whole series of education components with it that accompany it for the occupational therapy programs, but it's to assist with the steps of the consistent assessment of driving risk, looking at if a person might be at a stage of their medical change where looking at driving retirement is the pathway and they would be in the red, or people that have a condition that should be looked at by a driving evaluator at a future point in time and they would be yellow. And some people are doing just fine, but we might still build in education and awareness for planning ahead. Next slide. So this gives you an idea of how the spectrum of services work together between the community models and the healthcare models. Next, click it one more time. We have to march through this slide together, India. After attending an educational course, going to a driver safety course, let's say at AARP, a person may really notice through these self-assessments that they're concerned with their fatigue, or they're concerned with some aspect of their driving, and they may seek out going to their physician or asking to see an occupational therapist to see what's going on. Click again. Or you might have an individual that has had a stroke, and he wants to know if he can drive again. So click again. So this individual has been in the rehab process, but then will be referred to the specialized driving evaluation program to help answer his question if he can drive again. Next click. And you know what? When that gentleman goes for his evaluation, his wife may be with him, and she hasn't driven for a long time. He's been the primary driver since they retired, and she realizes she feels pretty rusty and she feels very nervous. Click again. So the community solution for her may be to go to a driving school and access some lessons to increase her confidence in driving, to build her skill set, because prevention of crash is really an underlying goal, and preservation of mobility and confidence is an underlying goal. So there are different programs and different services that are a match for people at different points in their progression through these life changes. Next slide. So I'd just like to tell a couple stories when we think about what a comprehensive driving evaluation may offer. Meet Henry. He's about 3 years since his stroke. During his rehabilitation, the occupational therapist, using that OT drive model, identified areas that would challenge his safe driving and talked about areas to work on during his recovery, and talked about planning for a comprehensive driving evaluation at the right time. And he's ready now. So he went and sought out an occupational therapy comprehensive driving evaluation. They went through an evaluation, explored equipment, identified the equipment that would be best for him, had it installed, offered lessons in the use of the equipment, and he has now been licensed by the state as an independent driver using hand controls. It's a process. And what's really important is that we understand this as a process. So those of us that may be in different places in advising and offering information to people, this is not just a driving eval. This is a driving evaluation process that helped Henry be independent. Next slide. In this story, I'd like you to meet Pat. She had and this is a person that I know, she had a right lower leg amputation due to diabetes. Her sensation had changed. She needed to have her leg amputated, and it was her right driving leg. Well, to cut through the story for this example, she selected a van with a scooter lift because she needed to use a scooter for transportation. She wasn't having great luck with her prosthesis. And she went a little higher in the equipment end because she wanted to ensure that driving was fun and easy. And she also looked at her husband and decided she didn't want him loading that scooter in and out of the car multiple times, possibly in a day, because they liked to go. So her goal was to hop in the car and go. She worked with the occupational therapist to get the equipment package that made sense for her. And now she is independent in the community and gets up going every day. And she's really enjoyed the independence, that the level of not only having the left foot accelerator so she can drive with her left foot, but also having a van equipped with automation that will help load that chair, has made that combination has really added up to independence for her. Next slide. And this is also a client, and I decided to use him as an example because nothing is easy. And this is Dan, and he was suffering from a moderate dementia. He was healthy and he was young for his age, as they would say, and he was a pilot, and he had a lot of education and a lot of independence, and was very, very used to being smart and independent. But he had dementia. His family had actually taken him to 2 driving evaluation services where he had failed. But you know what? Dan was still driving. He was driving illegally. He was creating stress. He was this issue of driving was creating stress and daily arguments with his wife. So I was contacted and had a session with Dan, his wife, the daughters, everybody together in the room, and all the reports from the driving evaluations, and we reviewed the data. And you know, in that at that table, everybody was in agreement. We came up with actionable cessation plans and steps that his wife was going to do, and she understood it. And in the moment, Dan was agreeing. The reality is the next day, Dan did not recall the meeting, nor that he had agreed to stop driving. But things had changed for his wife and daughters. They understood what Dan would have wanted if he could remember. They understood out of love for Dan and their community that they needed to make some changes. And they had the confidence that selling the truck was loving and supportive and what Dan needed. And you know what? Once the truck was gone, that stimulus was removed and the daily arguments faded because I followed up with them. So the point of using this example, again, it's not a driving evaluation, pass or fail, done with the story. Just as Deb Hill said earlier that it's not one and done with transportation options, it's not one and done when you look at the needs around a driving evaluation. So think about why you need a complex family of services to be helping people along this journey as decisions are made about driving, driving independence, and use of transportation alternatives. Next slide. The clinician does not take away driving, the disease does. This is another takeaway I hope we can get in place. Unfortunately, right now, there are many players that could be stepping in more, but we've got some mixed agendas going on. The clinician does not take away driving, the disease does. And the state is the only one that decides if people are licensed or not. The clinician, occupational therapist, assists with interpreting changes and translating those to an individualized plan and an understanding of risk. And the question may be about driving, but the outcome must address safe mobility with continued community access, whether as a driver or a customer of transportation options. Next slide. This is just a summary slide that it's not simple and not one and done. A person may go in and fail a driving eval, but they had cataracts and they end up being in the green and continuing to drive. A person may have had a stroke. They need to recover. Somehow we need to get them back in the system. Too many people leave sort of the rehab umbrella and never get brought back in to really look at their potential and look at their ability to drive, which may be several years down the road of recovery. And some people have severe conditions where stopping driving is really important. And it takes more than just saying stop driving. It takes support for cessation. It takes support for families. And it takes support for families of how to safely transport a person that may be dealing with cognitive changes. There's complexity in all of these pieces, but there are also providers. There are people that can step up and help in the right place if we knew the questions to ask. Boy, do we have a theme today in these sessions of helping people know what to ask so we can access the services that are out there. Next slide. And the next piece of this triangle is when you want to drive, we are encouraging more and more with various national toolkits out there. We need to plan for our driving changes way earlier. Just as we plan for housing and we think about our finances at retirement, we need to think about transportation options. Don't be car dependent. You don't have to be. People can learn, they can take the transportation options to the theater in the evening and still drive to the hairdresser at noon on Tuesdays. We need to get away from thinking that driving is something that you either do or you don't do 100%. Next slide. There are wonderful resources that are out there to assist with planning ahead. There's a new website I encourage you to go to, planfortheroadahead.com, has a number of tools, including one of the clever things is how much do you really spend on your car and how much money would you have for transportation options if you weren't spending that money on your car? It gives you some real numbers. It's an interesting exercise to go through. And there's a number of resources there out there. CDC has posted a whole section on my mobility plan, encouraging people to think about their mobility plan much, much earlier than a decision about stopping driving is on the table. Next slide. And I'd like to make a plug for AOTA's Older Driver Safety Awareness Week. This is where we really gather lots of the community partners and work on the first week in December. I guess I didn't put the dates on there. On the first full week in December, we look at highlighting various issues related to transportation and mobility, from thinking ahead to staying engaged without a vehicle. Many, many community partners work on public media interviews, get stories in the paper during the first full week in December as a way of building awareness, because we can have all the great programs in the world in our areas, and if we don't know they exist, they aren't helping us. Next slide. So join into Older Driver Safety Awareness Week, and if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
All right, Elin, that was awesome. Both of you. I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk about both of these topics. I feel like that they really went hand in hand, and that's why I wanted to bring awareness to occupational therapy's role, along with transportation needs in general. We don't hear enough about how the medical field kind of intertwines with, the mobility to drive. And you really, really knocked it out the park. And Deb, I want to thank you so much too. This is the last of the series for the Transportation Equity Forums that we put together. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone who registered, attended, and to all of the speakers that agreed to come on each and every forum. I'm looking, and it looks like we don't really have many questions. If there's anyone who has any questions, this will be the time to go ahead and type them in the question section. I will also, in the follow-up email that you will receive, make sure that both of these ladies' information is included, so that way if you have any additional questions, or you may want to contact them on your own in regards to maybe even, possibly having them speak on a platform, that can be possible. Again, the attachments should be available for both PowerPoints. So, if you want to go back later and look at something, you can. And then also the recording for this webinar will be available on our website at www.seal-ohio.org. Let's check one more time. I don't really see any questions. Let's see. A lot of people said that, it's great information here from both of you ladies, so that's good. All right, so that's our time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, of course. So thank you again, Elin. Thank you, Deb. And thank you to everyone that attended. And we'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.